And welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. It is now 9:15 p.m. and I have to say the weather is improving in Budapest. The days now do seem to be a little bit longer, and the while it's still cold, the sun has finally made an appearance. So that's the news here, and so welcome everybody to the Gaggle. This is for our Thursday night live stream. Always happy to see you. A few things I want to talk about, but before anything else, and as you know, I'm no adherent to the Jeffrey Epstein blackmail, child porn, child kidnapping operation, and I've been always skeptical of the whole thing. But I did notice with amusement today that the media are in absolute indignation that Hillary Clinton has been forced to testify before the House committee on the Jeffrey Epstein matter. Now, as a matter of fact, I don't think she did anything wrong. Just as I think the whole thing has been wildly exaggerated, and no one has really shown anyone any of the people whose names have been bandied about did anything egregiously wrong. So just haven't seen the evidence for it anymore. We've seen the evidence for this child sex ring, blackmail operation, and the rest. But anyway, suddenly the media are being playing skeptical because Hillary Clinton was forced to appear today and testify in secret. And then, of course, the media are reporting that Hillary Clinton stated unequivocally that she had never met Jeffrey Epstein. Well, no, Hillary Clinton did not state that unequivocally. Read her opening statement. Just read the opening statement. She says, "I don't recall ever encountering Jeffrey Epstein." That's not saying I never met him. I said I don't recall meeting him. So I might have met him, but that's it. Now, that's fine. Again, I don't think it's any big deal, but it is extraordinary the way the media are in the business of manufacturing news and making these proclamations that have not actually been made. She has not said, "I never met Jeffrey Epstein." Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk first of all a little bit about the negotiations taking place in Geneva between the U.S. and Iran, and then I want to talk a little bit about Hungary and Viktor Orban, and particularly the quite uh, heightening of tensions between Hungary and Ukraine. I wouldn't have said that they're on the brink of going to war, but they're as close as going to war as you can be. So that's kind of a very interesting development. So Todd says, "I don't recall that's a standard issue, run of the mill loyally answer." Exactly, exactly. That's what she did. She did a very the standard run of the mill loyally answer, and there was no business for the media to jump in and go far beyond what she actually said. She said, "I don't recall. I don't recall meeting him. I may have met him. I don't recall." Yeah, that's it. That's fine. I mean, I don't care. But hey, don't it's just. But when you start running interference for the Clintons, then that just becomes a little unbearable. But anyway, so basically the basic outlines of what's going on in Geneva are clear. Trump has declared, or Iran must never have nuclear weapons, and of course he repeated that um, at the State of the Union, and then he also made a number of very harsh declarations about Iran, greatest state sponsor of terror, all the Americans they've been killing since 1979, and so on. It was a very belligerent, very hostile um, series of statements that he made at the State of the Union, and coinciding obviously with the two aircraft carriers and the massive military power that's now arrayed against Iran. You have to take that seriously. So the negotiations that are taking place in Geneva are in some ways rather odd, because the talks are only concerned with the nuclear issue, namely nuclear enrichment. But the United States is, however, talking about all sorts of other things, and threatening Iran with force if it doesn't comply with those other things. So that's what makes these negotiations really rather bizarre. So we got they have the issue of enrichment, which they are negotiating, and then you have the issue of the ballistic missiles, which of course is Israel's issue. It's the issue that Israel has repeatedly brought up, and now the United States has adopted that issue as its own. And then, of course, the issue of its support for its proxies in the region. And then, of course, there's the matter of Iran's treatment of its own people. That's sort of the humanitarian issue that the Trump is so concerned about. Um, Now, it's fairly obvious that Iran really cannot make the concessions that the United States wants. I mean, on the nuclear issue, there's probably some flexibility, because, after all, um, Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed, or at the very least severely damaged, such that no real enrichment is likely to take place for quite some time. Okay, so that's one thing, and so I think Iran has made clear that it's ready to go back to the terms and the limits of the JCPOA. So something like the 3.2% enrichment that was permitted by the JCPOA. So Iran has said, yeah, well, we can go back to that, but we won't accept zero enrichment. And then they've also said that they would agree to certain things, such as the removal of the highly enriched uranium from Iran, or dilution of the highly enriched uranium, the sort of the uranium that's enriched to 60%. So they've said we're ready to do that, and they've also indicated that they're open to some suggestion that nothing's going to happen for 3 to 5 years. In other words, after Trump has left office, and they're even open to working out some sort of a consortium with some Arab states, presumably Saudi Arabia. I don't know how exactly that consortium will work, but no doubt those are details and can be worked out. So Iran has shown itself to be flexible on the nuclear issue. Iran has made clear that it's not going to compromise on the issue of ballistic missiles, understandably so, because ballistic missiles enable Iran to defend itself in the event of an Israeli and or U.S. attack. So to give that up means essentially it's an unconditional surrender. I mean, it means basically our country is open and Israel can attack us anytime it wants. So obviously, no leader is going to do that. As for its proxies, well, again, Iran would insist, well, we're a sovereign country. We maintain a sovereign foreign policy. We're entitled to support whomever we want. And, just as nobody tells Israel whom to support, or the United States whom to support, or the British whom to support, they say, no, you don't tell us whom we're permitted to support. So of all of those issues, and of course the issue of domestic repression, I mean, that Iran is least likely to make concessions there, because that really does get to the issue of the sovereignty of Iran. So the question then is, if you're going to limit this to the nuclear issue, then a deal is to be had. Other than, of course, zero enrichment. Iran's not going to accept zero enrichment, and so that there's no deal. If you bring up all sorts of other issues, then there is no deal. And then you raise the issue of, well, if the Trump administration then decides, well, we're just going to go ahead and issue all of our demands, and if Iran doesn't accede to them, then we will unleash our firepower. Well, okay. United States can do that. It's clear, though, that Iran has decided that its best bet is to take whatever United States has to throw at it, because making a concession now on the nuclear issue, just let's say the talks are all nuclear, then essentially Iran is accepting the principle of a phased unconditional surrender. So Iran surrenders on the nuclear issue today, and then in 3 months, the United States and Israel issues its demand that, well, now let's get on to the ballistic missiles issue, which we can say with 100% certainty that that's exactly what would happen. That once Iran concedes on the issue of enrichment, zero enrichment, accepts the U.S.-Israel condition, boom, it's going to be 3 months, maybe even 2 months before there'll be the next threat of force on the ballistic missile. So there's really very little point in Iran making these concessions. So Iran has decided, evidently, that it can just try and withstand whatever the U.S. has to throw at it. Now, we don't really know as yet what U.S. capabilities are, or what Iran's capabilities are. So that's really up in the air. I mean, it may be the U.S. has secret tricks up its sleeve that we just don't know about. I mean, obviously, the U.S. is much more technologically sophisticated than Iran is, and it's quite possible that the U.S. has the means at its disposal, essentially, to disarm any Iranian strike, Iranian retaliation. So that's a possibility. Also, quite likely is that Israel will jump the gun. Israel will launch a preemptive attack, and then in the face of Iranian retaliation against Israel, the United States steps in as a kind of would-be dishonest broker. So that that I think that's a quite likely a scenario. That may be a way for Trump to get himself into a shooting war with Iran without actually appearing to launch an unprovoked aggressive war against Iran. Oh, I'm just protecting Israel. I'm just using America's resources to protect Israel. A great friend and ally. That's we have to protect Israel from the mullahs. So that could be the way Trump's going to try and do it. But the real question will be whether the United States can withstand any casualties that Iran inflicts on it. So, in other words, if Trump launches an unprovoked aggressive war without any of the pretext that at least George W. Bush had, and the United States starts suffering casualties, will U.S. support for military action remain constant? Or will there suddenly be disenchantment, disillusionment, and then anger directed at Trump over American casualties? So it's an issue. So far, Trump has eschewed any lengthy military engagements. He bombed Syria twice during his first term, in and out, very, very quick. He killed Soleimani during his first term, and then al-Baghdadi is always talking about that, but they were all in and out, very, very quick. The 12-day war was also in and out, at least as far as the United States was concerned. The United States had that one operation hitting the nuclear facilities, but then Trump immediately called it a day and said, "Okay, that's it," and then allowed Iran to have like one free shot at a U.S. base in Qatar. So, unless the U.S. has some secret weapon, some secret AI weapon that we don't know about that will disarm Iran and prevent Iran from retaliating in any way, unless as that, then it's a prolonged war. Now, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the attack on Yugoslavia in 1999. So keep in mind, of course, that was an aggressive act, unprovoked war against Yugoslavia. However, Clinton and the media had been whipping up the public into a kind of anti-Serb fervor for years and years. It had started in 1991, so it was 8 years of unremitting hysteria about the Serbs, and then you had this fake, phony genocide that was declared. The Serbs did this, like the Srebrenica. Oh my gosh, these are the same people did Srebrenica. We have to do something about them. So all of that, and then you had all the fake stories that the Serbs had killed 100,000 Albanians and so on. So there was a level of popular support that Clinton could count on, and the European allies of the United States could count on. So even though it went on for a while, even though they lied going in, Madeleine Albright famously said, "I was going to just 3 days. It was going to be very quick," even though the idea that Milosevic was going to cave within 3 days was always absurd. But once the bombing started, then you've got the issue where we can't very well stop without losing credibility, because then we look as if we've failed. We look as if we're a paper tiger. So it did drag on and on for quite a while. It was an 11-week operation, and while public support was gradually waning, um, it won't the public disenchantment never really reached a critical mass. And I think that's what's important always to remember, that we always have a hope that somehow the public opposition to war and disgust with violence, disgust with killing other people, or even disgust with the loss of lives, of the lives of boys on our side, that's going to lead to the public screaming, "Enough! Bring this war to an end." But it never really happens like that. So while there are kind of anti-war people and so on, demonstrations, these demonstrations never really reach a critical mass. There's never the slightest um, danger that this could spill over into a major anti-government protest, anti-government insurrection. So there's never really reaches that stage. I mean, even in the case of the Iraq war, and there were very large protests before George W. Bush um, uh, launched his invasion. There were very large protests. However, um, once the United States was in Iraq, and once the invasion had taken place, much of the protests kind of disappeared, and were not even a significant factor. I mean, the war was unpopular, but it was never in any way a threat to the powers that be. I mean, let's remember, George W. Bush was reelected in 2004. The next year after the invasion, he was reelected. And so was Tony Blair. Tony Blair was reelected in 2005. So, no one lost his job. No one was punished. And so, yes, true, Bush and Blair are today, people who are somewhat discredited. Um, but Tony Blair is making a lot of money. He's all over the place. He's on the board of peace, so no one really suffered any consequences. So, what I'm saying here is that even if this project goes wrong, and Americans start suffering casualties, don't count on there being enormous protests and demands that the Americans end this war, and that Trump bring this thing to an end anytime soon. Anyway, so the meeting in Geneva took place, and it's come and gone. They're reporting back to their respective governments, and it's clear that the meeting, as might have been expected, didn't go particularly well. Here is the report in the Times of Israel. No, wrong. This is the wrong one. It always happens. Okay. Let me find the right slide, and this is just hold on a second. This slight technical glitch, and this should be this should be the one. Yeah. So here's the news from the Times of Israel. Nuclear talks wrap after significant progress, but the significant progress. That's a quote from the mediator, which is of course Oman. And here we have Report Trump aides leave Iran talks disappointed as gaps persist. U.S. President Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner met twice today with Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi as gaps between the two sides remain significant and more issues are still under discussion. And then, according to the network, the talks, which were mediated by Oman, lasted several hours and included both direct and indirect exchanges. Tehran reportedly offered to limit uranium enrichment to medical needs, while nuclear activity would cease for an unspecified limited number of years. Enrichment would later resume under a regulated regional framework. So, on the face of it, quite a reasonable program, and certainly enough there for Trump to tout this as well. I accomplished this. This is a better deal for the United States and Israel than the JCPOA was, which is, there'll be a moratorium on uranium enrichment. I mean, it's going to be very limited. It's going to be presumably less than 3.2% or whatever. And so you can say, yeah, that to me is that say I won this. I showed peace through strength and so on. And then the U.S. for its part is demanding an agreement without a time limit. Washington is said to be willing to allow low-level enrichment at the Tehran research reactor, but is insisting on full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear facilities and the transfer of all enriched uranium out of the country. Okay, so they're saying that they're willing to allow low-level enrichment, but insisting on a full dismantlement of Iran's nuclear facilities. So they would have to really start building this up again without really any guarantees that even as they were recreating their nuclear facilities, they wouldn't be attacked, and of course they would be. A source cited by Channel 12 says that Witkoff and Kushner left the day's first round of talks disappointed by what the Iranians had presented, underscoring the depth of the remaining disagreements. And then here is what the Wall Street Journal reported today as to what the U.S. Negotiating position was going in. And as you can see, that there's really never any hope that any sort of agreement was likely in these circumstances. So it says U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are entering a crucial round of talks over Iran's nuclear program with tough demands, under pressure from hawks in the administration and Republicans in Congress not to agree to a deal that could be criticized as soft. One should say also the Democrats are not exactly urging a negotiated deal. I mean, we saw the scenes during the State of the Union when the Democrats were jumping up and down, like seals, as Trump was, lambasting Iran, including Elizabeth Warren. In the talks now underway in Geneva, the U.S. negotiators were expected to make clear Iran must dismantle its three main nuclear facilities and deliver all of its remaining enriched uranium. And then they were also expected to reiterate that any nuclear deal must last forever and not sunset, the way restrictions rolled off over time under a nuclear pact negotiated under the Obama administration that Republicans have long said was too weak. Trump pulled out of that deal, and so on. And then it goes on, Iran insists on its right to enrich uranium, but is floating proposals to placate the U.S. They include reducing enrichment to as low as 1.5% from up to 60% currently, pausing enrichment for a number of years, or processing it through an Arab-Iranian consortium based in Iran. The discussions are hypothetical since Iran's nuclear program was largely decimated by a war with Israel and the US over 12 days. So that's the bizarre aspect of all of these talks, is that as far as we know, it's all been destroyed. So what exactly are we talking about? I mean, the centrifuges have been destroyed. The US is insisting on zero enrichment, but its negotiating team could be open to allowing Iran to restart a nuclear reactor in Tehran that can process very low enrichment for medical purposes. And then the US is offering only minimal sanctions relief to Iran as part of a deal. Well, of course, that's it's always part of any deal when you have with the United States, is the United States gives nothing. If you do this, this, and this, we won't bomb you, at least for the time being. But what about any concessions like sanctions relief? Nah, that may be something we'll talk about at a later stage. And then, as Iran was hoping for substantial relief for its beleaguered economy, a trigger for the mass protest that shook the regime early this year. The US wants to see Iran comply with the terms for an extended period, and if judged to be sticking to the agreement, it could in time ask for more sanctions relief and other benefits, the official said. Well, good luck with that. That's never going to happen. No sanctions. Those sanctions on Iran are there in perpetuity, just as sanctions on Russia are there in perpetuity. While Washington would also like Iran to curb its ballistic missile program and support for proxies, the Geneva talks will focus on Tehran's pathway to a weapon. But as I said earlier, that doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't mean that, oh, that's great, then at least that's not on the table. Yeah, it's not on the table at this round of talks. But that means once these talks conclude and once the United States has pocketed whatever concessions Iran would make, then we have the next round of talks. Now let's talk about the ballistic missile. And if you don't give us everything we want on the ballistic missiles, hey, that armada is still there, ready to unleash force against you. Some officials said negotiations over missiles and Iran's support for regional militias could be handled by U.S. regional partners with U.S. input. Senior U.S. officials have voiced concerns about Iran developing longer-range ballistic missiles. And then they have Rubio. I won't speculate how far away they are, but they are certainly trying to achieve intercontinental ballistic missiles. Well, this is a new one. And it's all been parroted by the familiar Israel first crowd, Israel's Amen corner, that somehow Iran is developing intercontinental ballistic missiles. It's only, 2 weeks away from having nuclear weapons, and put the two and two together, it's only about 2 weeks away from nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles. Only 2 weeks away from launching a nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missile against the United States. And I would say that no evidence for any of this, incidentally. And I would say that the Iranian insistence on not discussing ballistic missiles, it's a big, big problem, and I'll leave it at that. And that theme was taken out by the Financial Times of this ballistic missile. So the Americans are putting that on the table. Yeah. So even though we have these talks that ostensibly are about nuclear enrichment, no, the Americans are actually talking about ballistic missiles. U.S. warns Iran over ballistic missiles as pair meet for talks. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Tehran's reluctance to discuss weapons is a big problem. Yeah, it's a big problem. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned that Iran's unwillingness to discuss its ballistic missile program with Washington is a big problem. Okay? And then it says the Islamic Republic had thousands of short-range ballistic missiles that threatened U.S. forces and its bases and partners in the region. America's top diplomat said Tehran also had naval assets that threatened shipping and tried to threaten the U.S. Navy, and conventional weapons that were designed to attack the U.S. Well, they're only designed to attack the U.S. should the U.S. attack Iran. It's basically retaliation. So it's all about denying Iran the means to defend itself. And then Rubio criticized Iran for trying to get to the point where they ultimately can enrich uranium, though he acknowledged that the country was not doing so yet. They don't need to enrich in order to have nuclear energy. They don't need nuclear energy, by the way. They have plenty of natural gas. Well, they, they have they do need nuclear energy. Everybody needs nuclear energy, and also not up to Rubio or anyone else to decide who can and cannot have nuclear energy. Particularly as it's specified, and we've said this so many times before, it's specified in the Non-Proliferation Treaty that those states that give up the right to have nuclear weapons are entitled to all the benefits of nuclear energy and are entitled to enrich uranium, are entitled to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. So Iran's doing nothing wrong. Iran, as a signatory of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, is doing nothing wrong. As opposed to Israel, which is not a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and has a nuclear weapons program, and has not described to anyone the details of its nuclear weapons program. So in other words, it's a unique power in that it has nuclear weapons, but nobody knows exactly how many and what kind of nuclear weapons Israel has. Everybody else is obligated to disclose to the world exactly what nuclear weapons they have. Everyone except Israel. The fact that they insist not just on enrichment, but on enrichment in locations located inside of mountains is you would have to have lack common sense not to know what that means or what that could mean. And we should also remember that Germany and Japan enrich uranium. They're not nuclear weapon states. Brazil enriches uranium. It's not a nuclear weapon state. And asked whether Thursday was the last chance for diplomacy, Rubio said, I don't think diplomacy is ever off the table. He added that Trump's preference was to make progress on the diplomatic front. And I wouldn't characterize tomorrow, that's Thursday, as anything other than a set of conversations. If you can't even make progress on nuclear program, it's going to be hard to make progress on the ballistic missiles as well. So it's, again, it keeps coming back to that progress on the ballistic missiles, even though it's not on the agenda. So I wouldn't characterize tomorrow as anything other than the next opportunity to talk. All right, so given the demands that the United States is making, and given that I think Iran has reasonably made the decision that it needs to take a stand, that there's simply no point in just continuing to cave to U.S. demands because it's just, they're just going to be more and more and more demands. They're never going to stop. Then it's looking as if, there'll be some form of an attack on Iran sometime really in the very near future. How that's going to go and what exactly Trump is hoping to accomplish. It's hard to know, but it doesn't look like, because Iran, I think, is being very reasonable here, and because Trump seems to be so determined to this seek out this confrontation and to attack Iran, that it just doesn't look to me like there's any really getting point at which we can get off. So it's it looks like this attack is inevitable. Now, the other thing, as I said before, that I wanted to talk about was this increasing tension, bordering almost to a confrontation between Hungary and Ukraine. So, I don't need to do the introduction. I mean, relations between Hungary and Ukraine have been fraught for really pretty much since the start of the war. Hungary clearly has not supported the EU NATO position on the war, has not taken Ukraine's side. Orban, while he has supported the various sanctions, or at least he's voted for them, even though vocally he has always criticized them. He said that we're not so much shooting ourselves in the foot, we being the EU, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the lungs by imposing these sanctions. So but nonetheless he has voted for the sanctions, and then we've had various um, points of tension. We had various, each side has thrown out its diplomats, accusing one another of spying. Hungary has also accused Ukraine of torturing ethnic Hungarians to death, ethnic Hungarians living in Transcarpathia, torturing them to death because they didn't want to be called up to fight for Ukraine. And of course, Hungary has very vocally opposed any talk of inducting Ukraine into the European Union. No, here, Orban has been the most vocal, but other countries are not exactly enthused by the idea of Ukraine in the EU, because it's obviously going to bring the war right into the heart of the EU. But the Ukrainian farmers would just simply wipe out European farmers, Polish farmers, French farmers. So no one's very keen on the idea. But anyway, what suddenly brought this particular crisis on is, well, I mean, obviously there's an election that's taking place in Hungary. We've talked about that. It's on April the 12th. Orban, at least if you go by the polls, and I mean, and that's something maybe we can talk about next time. I don't want to talk about it now. How reliable these polls are in Hungary, but at least the polls that are published in the mainstream media all suggest that Orban will lose on April the 12th. And the whatever else you can say about Hungary and Orban. Orban's policies, at least as far as immigration and on the war, are actually quite popular among Hungarians. Hungarians do not want their country inundated with immigrants, and they're quite happy with Orban's policy of keeping Hungary out of the war. So that's quite popular. So Orban has essentially used the political campaign to suggest, perfectly reasonably, that the opposition, Peter Magyar and his TISA party, will, if they win the election, embrace the cause of Ukraine and make nice with Brussels and support all the things that Orban has rejected, namely sending arms to Ukraine and allowing Hungary to be used for the transfer of arms into Ukraine. So he says Magyar is going to do that. Now, Magyar denies this, and in fact, Magyar is suggesting that he's not going to change the policy, but he's going to have better relations with Brussels. But the only way you're going to get better relations with Brussels is if you change your policy. I mean, it's an obvious contradiction. That's what they want from Hungary. You change your policy and you get with the Brussels program on Ukraine. So if Magyar wants good relations with Brussels, as he promises, and particularly as he wants Brussels to release the 20 billion euros that is owed to Hungary, if he wants that, he's going to have to change his policy on Ukraine. So Orban is obviously campaigning to suggest that Magyar is going to embrace the Brussels policy on Ukraine, and that Zelensky is actively um, engaged in the election, and and that I think is also reasonable because we saw what happened at Davos, and then we saw what happened at the Munich Security Conference, where Zelensky openly and explicitly attacked, and in very personal terms, Viktor Orban. So at Davos, he talked about slapping a victor on the upside of the head, which normally one would say, if Trump had said something like that, we'd be hearing about Trump is threatening violence. He's threatening violence against a political leader. He's threatening assassination. But no one commented. Everyone thought it was quite amusing to talk about slapping Victor on the upside of the head. And then, of course, at Munich, he referred to Victor with a big belly. So it was kind of fat shaming. Again, if Trump had said that, well, you can't go around, commenting on people's physical appearances. But evidently Zelensky can. But anyway, what's happened now is that the Druzhba pipeline, whereby oil flows into Hungary from Russia, the Druzhba pipeline is out of operation, which means Hungary is not receiving oil. Now, under the 2022 sanctions regime that was imposed on Russia, landlocked countries such as Hungary and Slovakia and the Czech Republic had an exemption that they could continue to receive oil because they receive their oil by pipeline, and they don't really have any option to get oil by any other means. Whereas states that are able to receive oil by sea would have to stop importing Russian oil. And so therefore, all this time, Hungary and Slovakia have continued to receive crude from Russia. But now you got this Druzhba pipeline that is out of operation. And Hungary has repeatedly accused Ukraine of basically not repairing the pipeline. Naturally, the media, it was Russia that damaged the pipeline, Russia that damaged the pipeline, which is very strange for them to say this because we have evidence that Ukraine has repeatedly damaged the pipeline, deliberately targeted the pipeline. Indeed, they targeted the pipeline on Monday, the pipeline that's actually in Tatarstan. So we know, everyone knows that Ukraine has done this. But the media just repeat this stuff, Zelensky talking points. Oh, it was Russia that damaged the pipeline, even though, you just go through an easy search and say that Ukraine has repeatedly attacked the Druzhba pipeline. Now, in this case, why are they doing this? Well, they're doing this because, if there's no oil coming into Hungary, then the price of energy will rise, and therefore the heating costs will rise, and therefore Orban will be very unpopular, and the greater the likelihood that he will lose the election in April. It's very obvious. So you don't have to be a genius to figure that out. And so this has, of course, infuriated the Hungarian government. And Orban has said, well, Ukraine is posing an active, direct threat to Hungary's energy security. And that he is now sending in Hungarian forces, police, and whatever, in order to secure Hungary's energy infrastructure because it might come under attack from Ukraine. So, in other words, he's anticipating an attack from Ukraine on Hungary's energy infrastructure, which could come at any time. Well, that's that. You know, them's quite strong words. And so this is. Let's just take a look at the statements that emanating from Orban. And so here's the. Yeah, here it is. It says, we will not give in to blackmail. I have ordered increased security for critical energy infrastructure. The Ukrainian government is exerting pressure on the Hungarian and Slovak governments through an oil blockade. They will not stop there, as they are preparing further actions to disrupt Hungary's energy system. So remember, he's increased security for critical energy infrastructure and exerting pressure on through an oil blockade. So he's accusing Ukraine of imposing an oil blockade. Then he goes on. He wrote this open letter. He actually read out this open letter to Zelensky on a video. It's posted on Twitter. It's also posted on Facebook. And here's Orban saying, Mr. President, for 4 years you have been unable to accept the position of the sovereign Hungarian government and the Hungarian people regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. For 4 years you have been working to force Hungary into the war between your country and Russia. During this time, you have received support from Brussels and secured the backing of the Hungarian opposition. We also see that you, Brussels, and the Hungarian opposition are coordinating efforts to bring a pro-Ukraine government to power in Hungary. In recent days, you have blocked the Friendship oil pipeline. That's the Druzhba. Druzhba is friendship in Russian. Friendship oil pipeline, which is critical to Hungary's energy supply. Your actions are against Hungary's interests and endanger the secure and affordable energy supply of Hungarian families. I therefore call on you to change your anti-Hungarian policy. We, the Hungarian people, are not responsible for the situation in which Ukraine finds itself. We sympathize with the Ukrainian people, but we do not wish to participate in the war. We do not want to finance the war effort, and we do not want to pay more for energy. I urge you to immediately reopen the Friendship oil pipeline and refrain from any further attacks on Hungary's energy security. More respect for Hungary, and so on. And then here we have, again, another tweet from Orban. Yesterday, the Brusselian leaders, with von der Leyen at the forefront, reached an agreement with Zelensky to continue the war. That was the big meeting in Kiev, you know, the big hug and kissing session. This is bad news for Europe. A war is being prolonged that clearly has no solution on the battlefield, yet causes immense destruction. Every month, 35,000 people are killed or left permanently disabled, while the front lines barely budge. Hundreds of thousands of widows and orphans and mothers mourning their sons. This is what Brussels is supporting. Continuing the war costs European citizens enormous sums of money. Hundreds of billions of euros are being squandered with no result. In this war, it is not the Russians who are being crushed, but Europeans. And then on top of this, the risk of nuclear escalation remains as Europe is confronting a nuclear power. If we allowed it, Hungary would be dragged in as well. Last week in Munich, the leader of the opposition, Tisa Party, that's Peter Magyar, under German patronage, concluded a secret pact with the Brusselian leaders. In exchange for the support of Brussels and Kiev, he would pull Hungary into the group of European countries at war, agree to further financial support for Ukraine, and cut Hungary off from affordable oil and gas. Hungary must stay out of this The Hungarian government must safeguard the country's security. Hungarians can count on us. That is exactly what we will do. And now here's the BBC reporting about this. Orban, who is trailing in opinion polls ahead of pivotal election, has accused Kiev of imposing an oil blockade on Hungary by deliberately delaying the reopening of the Druzhba pipeline. Following the meeting of the Hungarian Defense Council, he said soldiers had been deployed to energy stations, police would patrol power stations, and drones were banned in Hungary's northeast border with Ukraine. There is no indication that Ukraine is planning any kind of attack. This is the BBC puts this in. Always this editorializing. How would you know? You don't know. You're just going by what Ukraine tells you. I'm not saying Ukraine is planning any kind of attack, but this is just, this is standard fare with the media that they always do this kind of editorializing. Any kind of attack, and its armed forces are already severely stretched in a 4-year full-scale Russian invasion. And then here's CNBC. Hungary accuses Ukraine of oil blockade, deploys soldiers to key energy facilities. Hungary has accused Ukraine of disrupting oil supplies it gets from Russia and has stationed troops at critical energy facilities across the country as Prime Minister Viktor Orban ramps up rhetoric around energy and national security ahead of parliamentary elections in April. I always love it when they have this, this very cynical view of Orban, yet there's never any cynical view of Zelensky, the way Zelensky, who was supposed to hold elections in 2024, almost 2 years have elapsed, and he doesn't seem to want to hold any elections anytime soon. But there's no cynicism there. Orban on Wednesday accused Kiev of imposing an oil blockade on Hungary by delaying the reopening of the Druzhba pipeline, which supplies it. And then basically, quoting from the video, and then this is they continue, and then here's Politico. Also, Orban deploys troops to guard energy sites, and then he says, "I have heard the briefings of the National Security Service and see that Ukraine is preparing further actions aimed at disrupting the operation of Hungary's energy system." And then it goes on. I have ordered the strengthening of protection and so on. Additional police will patrol designated power plants, distribution stations, and control centers, Orban said. A flight ban has also been imposed in Szabolcs, Szatmár, Bereg County in northeastern Hungary and the border with Ukraine. And then, but here's the interesting one. This is what I very important to highlight. Is the media continues that, it was Russia that attacked the Druzhba pipeline. Of course, the claim for that is exclusively comes from Zelensky. Zelensky said it was the Russians who attacked the Druzhba pipeline. I'm not sure why they would do it, but that's his claim. It was the Russians who damaged the Druzhba pipeline, and therefore, take it up with the Kremlin. It had nothing to do with us. And the media just duly wrote, every single media, it was all the Russians. It was the Russians. And the Hungarian says, well, even if it was the Russians, why have you been unable to repair it? And then here, this is from oilprice.com. Ukraine strikes Russia's Druzhba pipeline network. This is, and we've had this before, but this is the one that was the other day. It says Ukrainian forces launched targeted attacks on critical nodes of Russia's Druzhba oil pipeline network on Sunday night. Targeted. They said it's a targeted attacks, critical nodes of Russia's Druzhba oil pipeline. So all this time, we've been asked to believe, it's the Russians who attacked the Druzhba pipeline. And here we have, it was a targeted attack, critical nodes of Russia. So if they did it in Tatarstan, which is where it happens, why wouldn't they do it elsewhere? The strikes hit a major oil pumping and dispatch hub in Tatarstan, a central region of Russia, triggering widespread fires at the facility. This attack is part of an intensified Ukrainian campaign to weaken Russia's energy export economy. So Ukraine is engaged in an intensified campaign to weaken Russia's energy export economy But it was Russia that attacked the Druzhba pipeline. I mean, can you imagine the sheer ideological density, or denseness rather than density, ideological denseness of the media, who just repeat this, that it was the Russians who attacked the Druzhba pipeline, and then they themselves report, oh, well, the attack is part of an intensified Ukrainian campaign to weaken Russia's energy export economy. Yeah, exactly. It's the Ukrainians who have been repeatedly attacking the Druzhba pipeline, not only because they want to weaken Russia's energy export economy, but because they want to hurt Hungary and Slovakia, both of whom have said that they're not never going to accept Ukraine inside the EU. Similar strikes hit the Unecha station in Bryansk and the Nikolskoye station in Tambov, both critical to the Druzhba network. Oh, similar strikes hit the Unecha station in Bryansk and the Nikolskoye station in Tambov, both critical to the Druzhba network. Well, what a surprise. And I thought it was the Russians, just like it was the Russians who destroyed their own Nord Stream gas pipelines. The operation, which utilized long range drones, has disrupted Russian crude oil supplies to Hungary and Slovakia. That's interesting. So Ukraine utilized long range drones that disrupted Russian crude oil supplies to Hungary and Slovakia, both of which rely on the pipeline's southern branch. The two countries previously escalated a major diplomatic and energy dispute with Ukraine, accusing Kiev of deliberately disrupting Russian oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline. They previously escalated a major diplomatic and energy dispute, imagine, they accused Kiev of deliberately disrupting Russian oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline. You've just said that's exactly what Kiev is doing. You have said it. You said it a paragraph ago. That's what they're doing, but apparently it's an accusation. Hungarian and Slovakian officials say there are no technical reasons to stop oil flows, labeling the stoppage political blackmail and suggesting Ukraine is intentionally blocking the supply as a political maneuver following a standoff regarding Hungary's stance on Ukraine's EU membership. The two have been vocal in their opposition to Ukraine joining the EU, with Hungarian Prime Minister Orban explicitly pledging to block the process, citing risks of bringing war into the bloc. And then here's Szijjártó, who this is from MTI, Hungary's news agency, and he was saying, what a shock to say this. He says, those blocking the Druzhba oil pipeline today are the same as those who blew up the Nord Stream. He says, those who are blocking transportation on the Friendship oil pipeline today are the same as those who blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. I don't see too many things wrong with that statement. I mean, you could say that it wasn't Ukraine, that it was the United States. But whether it was United States or Ukraine, basically it's the same team. Either the United States did it, as Seymour Hersh claims, or Ukraine did it with the assistance of the United States. But it's it's the same team. And then says, according to a statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the minister highlighted at a public forum in the city that Ukraine had previously blown up the Nord Stream pipeline, which is what basically the German media are claiming. In fact, not much of the European media are insisting that Nord Stream was blown up by Ukraine. Of course, Zelensky had nothing to do with it, of course. Heaven forbid, had nothing to do with it. But they're claiming that it was Ukraine that did it. Nord Stream pipe, which carries cheap Russian natural gas and so on. He then opined that it was a shame that Europe still turns a blind eye to this incident, and that to this day there are European countries and leaders who celebrate the perpetrators as heroes. Again, doesn't sound an outrageous statement. And I say it again, The same people are blocking transportation on the Druzhba oil pipeline today as those who blew up the Nord Stream gas pipeline. This is the situation, and we cannot allow this. And that is why it is now a very important task to protect the pipelines responsible for Hungary's oil and natural gas supply from the threat of a physical attack. So basically, so Seattle, like Orban is saying, we are afraid that Ukraine will attack our oil and natural gas pipeline infrastructure. Why are we afraid of this? Well, because they've done it in the past. They did it before. If they did it before, then there's a good chance that they'll do it again. And they're going out of their way to create as many problems for Hungary as possible. So absolutely, we have every right to think that they might do this. Nowadays, a physical attack on the pipelines to Hungary cannot be ruled out. We must be prepared for them. We must be prepared to repel them. We have taken the necessary measures to prevent attempts to blow up oil and gas pipelines in Hungary. Seattle emphasized that the April election is also of crucial importance for Ukraine, as they know exactly that if we remain in office, they will not come an inch closer to the European Union in the next 4 years. The money of the Hungarian people will certainly not go to Ukraine in the next 4 years. And in the next 4 years, the decisions that would bring Hungary and the entire European continent into the war will not be made in Brussels. That's why Ukrainians, let's face it, are capable of anything. From a country where there is open manhunt on the streets, where people are beaten and dragged away in front of their children and families and then sent to the front, from a country where the rights of national minorities to use their native language are in a worse state today than they were during the Soviet Union, from a country where, unfortunately, anything is possible. So just keep in mind, this is all being said by a NATO member state. And therefore, we must expect that there will be more brutal and serious interference in the election than ever before. Brussels, Berlin, Kiev, that is the name of the axis. Brussels, Berlin, Kiev. In Brussels, they want us not to hinder war, migration, and gender policies. In Berlin, they want small countries like Hungary not to get in the way. But that, when the order comes, they just say, we understand, Commander. And in Kiev, they want Hungary to have a pro-Ukrainian government. This will be the stakes of the parliamentary election. So as I say, this is said by the foreign minister of a NATO member state, of an EU member state. It says the condition for minorities is worse there now than it was in the days of the Soviet Union. And we expect terrorist attacks from this great ally of NATO on our energy infrastructure. And then here is, now I just want to, before I explain that, Hungary has said, unless this Druzhba pipeline gets repaired, really, very, very soon, we're not playing ball with you at all. So they've already said, we will not support the 20th round of sanctions that Kaya Kallas has already put forward, even as she's working on the 21st round of sanctions. So she's put this 20th round of sanctions. Hungary has said we're not going to support it, and Hungary said it's not going to support the 90 billion euro loan because, well, why should we? I mean, he's saying, we don't support Ukraine. We don't support this war. We're losing as a result of it. This war should come to an end. And Ukraine is actively, deliberately working against us. It's working against our energy security. And Hungary is very vulnerable on the issue of energy. I mean, it gets its oil by the Druzhba pipeline, the cross-Ukrainian territory, and of course it gets its gas through the Turk Stream, which goes through the Balkans. So it can easily be cut off from energy. So, there's a real serious issues here. And when you're dealing with Ukrainians, with their assassinations, with their terrorism, with their, to be honest, um, violent extremism, the long history of violent extremism, and their active violent extremism that they're engaged in today, Hungary has every reason to be afraid that its energy infrastructure could come under attack from Ukraine, particularly as they all want to see Orban defeated in April. So anyway, Orban earlier this week told the EU no to the 90 billion euro loan for Ukraine and no to the 20th round of sanctions. So he wrote this. Orban wrote this letter to Antonio Costa, explaining why he opposed it. And here we have it. It says, "Dear President, facts are facts. There are no technical obstacles to restarting the oil transfer via the Druzhba pipeline to Hungary. It only requires a political decision by Ukraine. As you are aware, I am one of the most disciplined and consistent members of the European Council. I fully understand your concerns, but you also certainly see the absurdity of the situation. We take a decision financially favorable to Ukraine that I personally disapprove, then Ukraine creates an emergency situation in Hungary, and you ask me to pretend that nothing happened. This is not possible. I am not in a position to support any decision whatsoever favorable to Ukraine until they return to normality." And then, and here then, this is Telex, which explains Orban's decision, and then it says about Costa, what Costa wrote to Orban. It says that according to EU Logos, in his letter to Orban, Antonio Costa wrote that the Ukrainian government's claims about the oil passing through its territory differ from what the Hungarian government is saying. Well, of course it differs. Yeah, they're lying. Yeah, it's different. He promised to bring up the issue with Zelensky during his visit to Kiev on the 4th anniversary of the invasion. Well, he brought it up, and Zelensky said, no, it was the Russians who attacked the Druzhba pipeline, and then, of course, they accepted it and said, well, Hungary's got to find some other way of getting its oil. And this is what they've been saying for some time, because they don't like the fact that Hungary receives its oil from Russia. So, well, get it through Croatia. But of course, that would make it much more expensive. And Hungary said, no, it's our sovereign decision. And why should we get our oil via Croatia when it's going to cost us 4 times as much? Anyway, then it says, at the same time, Costa made it clear that the conclusions of the European Council must be respected. With this, he was referring to the fact that the Hungarian government also intends to block the loan for Ukraine, which the body unanimously agreed on in December. The European Council agreed on a 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine, but this will have no financial impact on 3 member states, including Hungary. The part was included in the so in other words, the 3 states, which is Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic, they wouldn't be on the hook to, if this loan goes south, which of course it will, because there's no way Ukraine can repay it. So they say, well, we're not going to be on the hook. We're not, we'll support it, but we're not going to be involved in repaying any of this. And then Siarto said, we are blocking the 90 billion euro EU loan for Ukraine until oil transit to Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline resumes. Ukraine is blackmailing Hungary by halting oil transit in coordination with Brussels and Hungarian opposition to create supply disruptions in Hungary and push fuel prices higher than before the elections. By blocking oil transit to Hungary through the Druzhba pipeline, Ukraine violates the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement, breaching its commitments to the European Union. We will not forgive him. We will not give in to this blackmail. All right. So you can see here that what the EU Ukraine game is. Um, but it's also striking that on issue after issue, the EU and NATO are taking the side of a non-EU, non-NATO member state against an EU NATO member state, because on each of these points, they say, oh, yeah, it was Russia that destroyed the Druzhba pipeline. Oh, and Ukraine is unable to repair it. So they accept the claims of Kiev, even though, as we've seen, Kiev has had a strategy, which was that oilprice.com made clear. It's a long-term strategy of hitting Russia's oil exporting industry. They said it's a strategy. That's exactly why they hit Druzhba. Why would Russia hit its own oil pipeline, the very pipeline on which it's making money? Why would it do that? It makes absolutely no sense. Why would Russia want to hurt Hungary, which is actually with which it has actually rather good relations, one of the few, pretty much, other than Slovakia, is the only EU NATO member state with which Russia has good relations. Why would Russia want to hurt Hungary? It makes absolutely no sense. But the EU accepts what Ukraine says. It takes the side of Ukraine against Hungary and tells Hungary, well, get your oil somewhere else. Why what are we? Okay. So Ukraine basically attacks a pipeline. Ukraine sabotages European energy security, and then Hungary gets attacked by the EU as if it's Hungary's fault that that its energy security has been jeopardized. So that's that's an interesting development, and it's rather interesting. So essentially, a NATO EU member state is saying we are directly threatened. We are afraid of terrorism. We're afraid of violence emanating from the state to which NATO and the EU have unconditionally committed themselves to. Anyway, let's now go to our locals page and see the comments and questions that our Gaggle community has put forward. These are as I always say. I need to. For some reason, I'm not having. I can't get in right now. Let's see if. Just I have to log in. For some reason, I got logged out of our own Gaggle community. So I'm now on our page, and so as I was saying, these are the people who care about our about the dogs, who feel depressed and feel unappreciated, and just unrewarded. They need compensation. So really, I'm always very, very grateful for our Gagglers. I think I'm very touched by their commitment to our community. So really, thank you. I appreciate it. The dogs, they don't say much, and even if they were able to speak, they wouldn't say much. But I would say thank you so much. Anyway, first question from Aristotle. Aristotle 1. Thank you very much, Aristotle. Appreciate your generosity. Aristotle says, some comments on Epstein. I think you would accept you are a minimalist on Epstein. Okay, I think that's fair. Wexner, in his interview to the Select Committee, gave enough to disprove this. I wouldn't have said that. He hired Epstein on the recommendation of the Rothschild, yeah, though did not know what Epstein did for them. Wexner could give no details of Epstein's part time job, for which he received up to $1 billion from him, aside from supposedly establishing an inventory for furniture. Well, I don't think that's the case. Was, um, I think he was very good at money management. I mean, the guy did work at Bear Stearns for many years. Now, you don't work at Bear Stearns um, for many years without knowing something about money management. I think he was very good at it. I think everybody who dealt with him knew, yeah, he was rather good at dealing with legal and accountancy problems. I mean, and here you have the example of Noam Chomsky. Nobody is is stupid enough to accuse Chomsky of being involved in any sex rings or having any interest in young, attractive women, wandering around in his massive townhouse. But what Chomsky appreciated about Epstein is he was able to get himself out of a kind of the legal financial jam that he found himself in. I mean, if you can do that, if you're able to give advice, um, and apparently, again, it showed he was very generous. He could have charged Chomsky. I mean, apparently, he did this for Chomsky for free. He didn't even charge him. Then you'd have to say, yeah, look, these people, Wexner and the rest of them, um, they care about money. They wouldn't hire anybody whom they believe to be bad with money. They wouldn't hire me because they wouldn't think that I would know enough about money. So they hired Epstein because he was good with money. And they wouldn't hire people like these very wealthy people. They have lots of money, and what do they want to do with that money? They want that money to be bigger. That pile of money to be bigger tomorrow than it is today. They're not interested in sex rings or all sorts of young girls engaging in whatever they were engaged in. That's not what they're interested in. They're interested in money. That's how they got to be so wealthy. So therefore, the key to their involvement with Epstein was he was very good at what he did. So anyway, and I think that's the case with Wexner. Is what he said in his. Is there concrete evidence in the files that Epstein was working for the Jewish mafia for intel or evidence of pedophilia? Could you really expect to find any of these stated directly in these published documents? Only if all people involved are interviewed under caution, aggressively investigated, will matters become clear. Thomas Massey confirmed Epstein was close with Mossad. Well, Thomas Massey can say whatever he wants. You have to provide evidence. There's no evidence for this. I mean, we know he was friendly with Yehud Barak. Okay. Barak hasn't been in power for many years. He's kind of a failed politician in Israel. Now, as I said, I am prepared to accept the lesser thesis, which is that he had contacts with Mossad, with CIA, with MI6, because he moved in very salubrious circles. He knew a lot of rich, powerful people. He wined and dined with them. He partied with them. He had great parties at his home to which he invited all sorts of eminent people who themselves were rich and well connected. And therefore, it's quite likely that intelligence figures would come to him for information. Why? Of course they would. Of course they would want to know. Well, what are people saying? I mean, I think exactly. What are people who are in the know saying? That's what intelligence people do. I mean, they're hired to gather intelligence. What does the CIA do? Wherever it is. Well, it's gathering intelligence, doing other things, of course, as well. But the its primary task is gathering intelligence, and so does MI6, and of course, so does Mossad. So I do think that it's quite likely that Epstein did have contacts with Mossad and with CIA and with MI6. And I'm quite sure, given his friendship with Prince Andrew, given his friendship with Mandelson, MI6 would be very interested in whatever he discussed with those people. So I do think that. What I'm doubtful about is that he was engaged in some kind of an operation on behalf of Mossad. I wouldn't even know what operation that might be. But you'd have to tell me what kind of operation that he would be engaged in with Mossad. Um, the people who were around Epstein, one would have to say, are kind of moderate on the Israel issue. By moderate, I mean, of course, they were, you know, they're not exactly anti-Israel. In fact, they're generally supportive of Israel. But in comparison with the extreme Zionist views, that you get, in throughout most of American public life, the people that Epstein consorted with were not exactly the most fanatical of Zionists. I mean, you have obviously Noam Chomsky. I mean, we don't even have to talk about that. Chomsky was, probably one of the, for many years, the most ardent critic of Israel in the United States. I mean, since then, I think he's been eclipsed by Norman Finkelstein and Max Blumenthal and others. But for many years, Chomsky was the leading voice critical of Israel. The Larry Summers, kind of I would say, fairly moderate on the issue. Dershowitz, no, but Dershowitz was his lawyer. I mean, he hired Dershowitz not because any links to Israel, but Dershowitz is a pretty good lawyer, and Dershowitz is pretty good at getting people off. And when Epstein got into trouble in Palm Beach, he needed to put together a very good team of lawyers. Dershowitz was one of them. Kenneth Starr was another one. I mean, it was a kind of a dream team of attorneys. So I just don't see the Israel Mossad thing. And that generally, you'd have to say he really. I mean, if you think of the whole Israel lobby and its presence in the United States, Epstein seems to have been mainly friendly with a more moderate wing of the Israel lobby. As I say, people like Larry Summers and Noam Chomsky. I mean, it's not I mean, and, Mark Levin was not part of his circle. Norman Podhoretz was not part of his circle. Marty Peretz was not part of his circle. So that's why it's like it was a more moderate win. Okay. Aristotle then says, my critique is that you approach this too legalistically and from a purely geopolitical perspective. This is a corrupt business network. Well, I agree, it's a corrupt business network, yeah. Israel wants control over the tech industry, both by relocating it to Israel and using it to surveil Western societies abroad through control over social media and backdoors. I agree. I agree with you on that. This was the business of Yehud Barak was in. This is likely an important control system as that of ADL and APAC. Larry Ellison is another mode of this control. All of that I accept. I just don't think Jeffrey Epstein had anything much to do with any of that. I think, yeah, all of what you said, maybe about Yehud Barak, but clearly Larry Ellison, his son David Ellison, we know exactly what they're engaged in. And of course, they're working for Israel, and and for all of the things that you said. They are the surveillance of social media, control of the information space, everything like that. I absolutely agree with you. I just think that's a separate issue from Jeffrey Epstein. And I just don't think the case again, that the case, the sexual blackmail and whatever, I don't think that's been remotely been demonstrated. Um, and I think that how, if he was working for Israel, what exactly he was doing for Israel, and not just vaguely, but actually specifically what he was doing, that hasn't really been um, explained. I mean, I'll be generous and say, well, maybe that is yet to come out. It's just that he hasn't come out so far. What we know is, yeah, he was part of a corrupt business network. Obviously, he was very good at what he did. He was very, I think it's a talent, money management, um, and so and he had these parties. He was able to bring all these people together. It's not everybody who can have parties in his townhouse on the Upper East Side, and Noam Chomsky and Steve Bannon and Larry Summers and Woody Allen, and they're all everyone is at his party. I mean, that takes a certain talent. I just don't quite see how that in itself is part of some kind of a intelligence operation, other than, well, of course, you hear a lot of things. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you mix with lots of important people, you're going to hear a lot of gossip. So if that's all you're looking for, if that's all he's done, that he's picked up a lot of gossip and passes this gossip on to others. Well, okay, maybe, and maybe that gossip that goes to the intelligence agencies. But his friends were doing this. I mean, they were relaying gossip to him. That's what people do to one another. What goes on in cabinet meetings, what you hear in confidence at the club, what the editor of some newspaper, what the editor of the Times said to you, and what he heard, and what Murdoch said to Tony Blair, and the rest of it. Yeah, then you pass all of that on. I mean, that's what these people trade in. That's their value. Their value is that they're purveyors of information. So I think that part is true. I just don't. I don't see the big, the infrastructure, not the infrastructure, the superstructure of this great um, global intelligence network in which Jeffrey Epstein was at the center of it. I just don't see it. But anyway, thank you so much, Aristotle, for your generosity. I really appreciate that. Anyway, Robert, good to see you, Robert. Robert always raises the cultural, intellectual tone of our discussion, and he's contributed some very interesting articles, or interesting comments recently on the music pieces that we've posted, particularly the recent one of Arnold Schoenberg's Pelléas and Melisande. So thank you so much, Robert. Really, really interesting. Everyone should go listen to Schoenberg's Pelléas and Melisande. Don't be put off by the fact that it's Schoenberg and then you're expecting something dreadful, some dreadfully atonal piece of music. This isn't atonal, the atonal music that came later. So this is still very much tonal. So listen to that and also read Robert's comment. Anyway, Robert says, doesn't there seem to be a sizable contingent of the US military which thinks the Iran-Russia-China cooperation, particularly the integration of Chinese radar with Russian missiles, could give the US quite a run for its money this time around? I think that it seems to be that's being discussed from the various media accounts. There seems to be some trepidation about Iran's capabilities. Russia, China, but nobody at least knows how formidable that is. I mean, we saw that Venezuela was also supported by Russian and Chinese radar, missiles, and so on. That happened in Venezuela. The same thing with Assad. And in neither case, neither Venezuela and Syria, was there any really effective resistance. Now that may be different in the case of Iran, and I do think that this is playing a role in the thinking as to why Iran needs to be attacked now. I mean, I think they are thinking that if we leave it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, Iran will be much stronger, and then Iran will be part of a kind of Russian Chinese, um, kind of defense network, and then Iran would be much harder to deal with. So I think that is playing a role as to why they think this is the time to strike. So it's like, so in other words, what you're saying, I think, is right, but it goes, both ways. On one hand, yes, they think Iran might be able to inflict some damage to the United States through its active cooperation with Russia and China. But by the same token, they're saying, well, now's the time to do it, rather than dawdle for a few years, by which time Iran's going to be very difficult to deal with. It's the Russian problem with regard to Ukraine. Russia had an opportunity to defeat Ukraine decisively in 2014. Russia didn't take that opportunity and then dawdled for 8 years. Within those 8 years, Ukraine was much stronger. So by the time Russia decided to deal with the Ukrainian problem, as it should have done in 2014, Ukraine was already much stronger, and there was going to be a real mountain to climb to defeat Ukraine. So I think may well be that's what the Americans are thinking, that now is the time to deal with the Iranian problem, rather than letting it drift. But how much capability does Iran have now, and how much damage they can do to the United States? I think that's an open question, and I don't think they themselves know exactly what the capabilities is. I mean, it's one thing to break through the Israeli missile shield, the Golden Dome, so they can do that. Can they really hit American bases? Can they hit American ships? American aircraft carriers, which I have to assume are very strongly defended. I guess we'll see about that. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for your generosity. And Cynthia, always good to see you, Cynthia. Cynthia, I always say, is a great, distinguished film expert and film scholar with an encyclopedic knowledge of film history and filmmaking and film production, and who always contributes extraordinarily interesting and stimulating comments and observations and judgments on the films that we screen here every week. And the last screening we had on Monday night my time, was of course Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut. And Cynthia really outdid herself. Put so many interesting comments, observations there, and background briefings and so on. That it's almost more interesting than the film itself. Which I may be in a minority. I wasn't that impressed by it, but others are. So it's up to Gagglers to make a decision as to whether this is a notable film or it isn't. So, but either way, what isn't up in question is Cynthia's contributions, which are absolutely impeccable. And so, watch the film, read Cynthia's comments, and then make your own mind up as to Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's last film. Anyway, so thank you, Cynthia. And Cynthia says, reports of Kurdish factions mobilizing against Iran raise a stark question. If they truly threaten the regime, Tehran would have crushed them with its usual brutal efficiency. Some observers say the inner circle is bought off, prioritizing survival over defending the state, like Venezuela's hallowed elites. The Kurds remain over and over again just as useful idiots, deployed when convenient, abandoned when not. Well, I think that's right. I mean that has happened time and again. The Kurds may or may not. I mean, these things are up in the air whether the Kurds were promised after World War One a state of their own. So I mean, that's, people have been debating that as to in all of those agreements after World War One, Sykes-Picot and the rest, whether the Kurds were actually promised a state. I tend to think that they weren't. There was enough of a ambiguity as to what was promised to them that one can say, no one really broke their word when they didn't grant statehood to the Kurds. But either way, Kurds have been used time and again subsequently as a way of weakening either Iraq or weakening Iran. And so I think it's happening now. And but I think it's almost certainly happening among other national groupings in Iran, among say the Baluchis, about the Azeris, particularly the Azeris. Azerbaijan is now increasingly becoming a NATO satellite state, so I think the Azeris are going to be a problem. Maybe Arabs are going to be a problem, and then of course there is the issue of the liberal urban bourgeois uh, forces, the ones who care about, women and all the rest, they're always, who want Iran to become like the West, with all the, everything that goes together with the West, it's like, gay marriage, transgender, abortion rights for all, and so on. So that's another faction that the West is counting on. I am not sure to what extent the Iranian leaders were able to crush the insurrection last month. Obviously, they used force very decisively. Since Iran admits that they killed, I don't know, whatever, 3,300 people or whatever they're claiming, and that's probably an underestimate. That's quite severe repression. So they were obviously taking this very seriously, and given that level of force, you have to wonder whether there's anything left in the tank. Are there still insurrectionists ready to come out and and try to overthrow the government, coordinating their actions with the U.S. bombing? I don't know. I mean, Gaddafi failed to do that. Gaddafi was obviously a much weakened leader by 2011. He failed to crush the insurrection before NATO launched its attack. So therefore, he was not really able to win the civil war while he was coming under attack. It's very difficult because the moment you come out into the open and try to defeat your domestic enemy, then you get hit by NATO, which is what happened in that case. But it seems like Iran has crushed quite effectively the insurrection that it was facing. So I'd be surprised that any uprising to coincide with the U.S. bombing would be particularly effective. I might be wrong, but I don't think it would be particularly effective. The the various national groupings, yeah, I mean those are always a problem. But I don't know whether it takes a particular kind of mentality to mount your insurrection while your own country is coming under attack. I mean, there are people who do it. There's no question. So there's there's plenty of people who do that. I mean, if you think of Pahlavi, the so-called crown prince, the so-called crown prince advocates bombing of his own country. So, but that I think suffices to discredit him in the eyes of his own people. I mean, if you're calling for an attack on your own country, that means you don't really care about your country, and and therefore you're not you're not anyone to take seriously. And I think, and that's true. I think of a number of these Western-sponsored puppets, like Tikhanovskaya in Belarus, who's always asking for sanctions against Belarus, and then what you got, Karamurza and others in Russia also calling for sanctions against Russia. I mean, what kind of a Russian are you if you're calling for sanctions against your own country? So that's why I have doubts that there'll be that whatever insurrection takes place once the Americans attack will be particularly substantial or effective. Might be wrong, but I would doubt it. The Kurds might do it, but the Kurds have invariably um, made the wrong choice. They always make the wrong choice. They always back the wrong horse, and then they get crushed. And I mean, we've seen this in Syria, where they did the same thing. Um, they essentially tried to take the side against Assad, who was really their protector, decided to support the various Islamist groupings, and then, of course, the Islamists turned on them. And I think, as always, they're going to find that they were better off under the old regime, which gave them a measure of security and autonomy, than they are under the Jolani's rule. Now, whether there's an elite grouping among the Iranian elite, or among Iranian leadership, that the Delcy Rodriguez type in Iran, I don't know. I would be surprised. I don't think the United States has that kind of a reach and appeal in Iran that it might have in Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela is almost America's backyard, so America would be able to get find some people in there that are ready to work with Washington in some Venezuela, maybe even in Cuba, in Mexico. I think it's a stretch that there'd be people in Iran who are ready to work with Washington. I mean, Pahlavi is not there. Pahlavi would have done, but those people who were around Pahlavi, they're all gone. They're not in Iran anymore. So I'd be surprised if they can pull Delcy Rodriguez in Iran. Anyway, thank you so much, Cynthia. As always, thank you. Really appreciate the comment. And then Cynthia goes on. Maybe Trump should be curious why Ukraine hasn't surrendered yet, despite huge losses in their fighting age population, loss of territory, and destruction of critical infrastructure. To neocons, fighting to the last Ukrainian makes perfect sense, but Iranians fighting for their sovereignty and for their non-Zionist culture doesn't compute at all. Well, that's a very good point. Everyone thinks that it's perfectly reasonable, understandable that that the Ukrainians fight, go on fighting against hopeless odds. I mean, Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. That's clear. Ukraine cannot defeat. Now we talked about what Russia's objectives are and what Russia can, whether Russia can defeat NATO. We don't want to get into that now. We talked at length on Tuesday. But if Ukraine can go on fighting, and no one thinks that there's anything unusual about Ukraine going on fighting, why is it surprising that Iran also would go on fighting? Doesn't compute at all. The hypocrisy is glaring. One nation's desperate defense is glorified, while in others is dismissed as incomprehensible. Yeah, I agree. That's right. It's glorified, and the same, that often happens. I mean, in the case of Yugoslavia, when NATO issued a ridiculous ultimatum, and then was surprised that Milosevic rejected the ultimatum and preferred, um, you know, taking the beating that NATO administered than surrendering and humiliating themselves. I mean, and I think that's, and to be honest, I don't think it's a hard choice in the case of Iran, because so unreasonable is U.S. behavior, so unreasonable are these demands, that there's really no basis. It's not like, hey, well, this is not a bad deal. Maybe we should take the deal. Maybe we would get all sorts of benefits through this. You're not getting anything. I mean, the U.S. isn't even offering a lifting of sanctions. You're asking for unconditional surrender without even any benefits. No, no sanctions lifting. I mean, so I just don't think it's a particularly hard choice. But yeah, but you're absolutely right, Cynthia. With all this, they profess to be baffled. I don't understand why Iran doesn't accept the deal. Why don't they just unconditionally surrender? Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. And here's Robert saying, since the 1990s, Iran has been only 1 month away from developing nukes. And I think there's a very good video, and I think I'm sure many people have seen that video of Netanyahu over the years, starting in 1996, saying Iran is just 1 month, 2 weeks, whatever, away from having nuclear weapons. So you see, Netanyahu, from 30 years, he's been saying the same thing. And yet here we are now, this mantra is repeated by Trump and by Steve Witkoff. And they're repeating it even though their own intelligence agencies, the CIA, the director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, has said Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program and hasn't had one for 20 years. It's their own intelligence, and instead they're accepting the nonsensical claims of Netanyahu. Anyway, here's NKMRD. So anyway, thank you, Robert. And here's NKMRD, who says, well, that might not even be true in time and potential, Robert, but maybe not in terms of intention. Nuclear bombs are ugly in different kinds of way. It's not their pure destruction part that makes them ugly. And yeah, okay. Yeah, that's right. But I think that there's just no evidence that that they're developing, and they have any intention of developing them. So anyway, it says, Robert says, does the EU believe that restricting Hungary's oil pipeline energy will cause Hungarians to blame Viktor Orban for incompetence, or will citizens instead see it as external pressure or blackmail from Brussels and resist rather than capitulate? Well, yes. I mean, that's a very good question. I think that's what the EU thinks, that just make life, if you make life difficult for Hungarians. I mean, Orban's vulnerability is the economy. Roughly you can say there's inflation in Hungary, and I think all Hungarians experience inflation. And there is a general sense among Hungarians that that Hungary just hasn't done as well as comparable EU member states. So it just hasn't done as well as the former members of the Soviet bloc, and I think that is being blamed on Orban. I think unfairly, but nonetheless, I think it's being blamed on him. He's been prime minister for 16 years, so it's inevitable. So that's why, if you make life even worse on on economic issues, then they figure, well, people, the Hungarians will be angry, frustrated, and will feel in much the way that other peoples would feel within Syria or Venezuela or anywhere else. I think if we get 4 more years of Orban, we just get 4 more years of the same thing. It's just going to go on and on and on. These fights between Budapest and Brussels, they're not going to relent. They're going to keep withholding the money. They're not going to give Budapest any money, and they're going to keep making demands on Hungary and keep pressuring, Hungary on issues of energy and so on. So Magyar is offering a break. Somehow, well, things may be different. So I think that's what the EU is counting on. Now, your point: are they going to see that we're coming under pressure and blackmail from Brussels? That may be. That's what Orban is counting on, and that's his message. We're being blackmailed by Brussels, and we'll see whose argument prevails. To me, it's obvious, whose argument should prevail. But the EU is counting that hey, we're making life difficult for Hungarians. Hungarians will blame this on Orban. So anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then NKMRD says, today I read in a news article that Orban decided to alarm military forces of the situation and make them more visible, at least. Yeah. The power of sexual feelings can make many people weak, just like the power of money. I don't blame people as much for falling for that than people who actually make business form, that make it an industry, find another measure. Okay. All right. Then I think that's right. And I think that where are we? Yes. I think my time is up. And thank you, everybody, for all your comments and questions and thoughts. I think a number of people are disagreeing with me on Epstein, or at least on some aspects of the Epstein case. But always enjoyable to have a dialogue with Gagglers. So thank you so much for all of these questions and comments. So we'll have some more podcasts over the weekend, and then we're doing the joint live stream with Peter on Monday, and then on Tuesday we're having my solo. In the meantime, watch Eyes Wide Shut, and vote for what you think should be shown next Monday as the runner-up in the secret societies, cults, movie poll. So Eyes Wide Shut won by a large margin, but see if we can get somebody to win the runner-up slot by a wide margin. So please, if you haven't voted, please vote. If you haven't seen Eyes Wide Shut, please watch it. Read Cynthia's comments. It's really, really worth your while. Anyway, thank you very much for today. I'll see you next week. All the best. Good night. Bye-bye.